But Hardie's were taking no chances. They paid an $11,000 success fee to former ALP State Secretary Stephen Loosley to make sure no action was taken. Loosley organised a meeting with the Premier's Chief of Staff, Graham Wedderburn.
The briefing was much more positive than expected. Loosely described it as a perler. They don't get much better than that.
I think everyone welcomed the establishment of a foundation. A foundation with nearly $300 million in it to look after the interests of victims, and even, if I recollect correctly, some actuarial data that suggested that would be adequate. But hang on, they deceived everyone.
Not quite everyone.
As soon as they announced what they were doing, it was blind Freddie knew what was on. It was nothing more than nothing short of trying to sanitise their name, get out of the asbestos liability system and move on.
It's good to see that finally Labor has put a public position out on James Hardie.
Paul Bastian, New South Wales Secretary of the Manufacturing Workers Union, has a long history defending asbestos victims. He was identified by Hawker Britain as a possible threat to the plan.
We kicked in only a couple of days later to the letter to the Premier, and where we actually said to the Premier, not only that it was a rort, but that, here's 10 or 12 questions you should be asking James Hardie about how they can possibly say $293 million will cover future victims.
Why did they receive no response to that
letter?
Well,
because the existence of that letter is in doubt. You realise that we've looked at the records of the Cabinet Office, we've looked at the records of the Attorney General's Department and the Industrial Relations Minister. There's no record of that letter.
The union insists they sent the letter and alerted the Premier. No one disputes the fact they raised the alarm in meetings with the Industrial Relations Minister, John Della Bosca. So your Industrial Relations Minister is meeting with them regularly. He is
over a range of issues, I should make clear.
Indeed. He's in possession of the knowledge that the unions are very concerned that they have a template of questions to put to James Hardie, and no one tells you?
Well, no one told me.
The lobbying effort had succeeded. The head of PR at James Hardie wrote to the Premier's Chief of Staff, Graham Wedderburn, after the announcement.
The reaction from stakeholders has been neutral to positive. The next day media coverage was limited but positive. Stock is up by 3%. If there is anything we can do to assist the government, please let me know. My home number, should you need it, is...
Premier Carr may have ignored his own union comrades, but he sat up and listened when the fund's chairman, Sir Lou Edwards, came to him for help early this year. Edwards told him the fund was running out of money fast. Carr instigated a powerful commission of inquiry to find out what had gone wrong.
To say that James Hardie treated the plight of victims of its asbestos products with disdain would be an understatement. It embarked upon a course of doing all it could to ensure that even legitimate claims made in the interests of asbestos victims would go unsatisfied.
The case against James Hardie is now being examined in excruciating detail. Hundreds of emails, letters and telephone conversations never meant to see the light of day, exposed to reveal the inner workings of a deal that put the needs of shareholders before the victims and possibly even before the law.
Reckless indifference, how does that fit in with dishonesty? They're different concepts, aren't they?
Yeah. These lawyers have a long history of fighting James Hardie in asbestos cases.
If his conduct is dishonest, that should be a finding that's made and is made against him publicly.
They believe criminal charges should be laid against the Hardie's executives chiefly responsible for the scheme.
Was to primarily focus on Shafran and McDonald and finding against them on the basis of fraud, deceit, negligence, dishonest conduct and misleading and deceptive conduct.
This resolves James Hardie's asbestos liabilities.
A crucial part of the case against the CEO, Peter McDonald, is that his very announcement of the birth of the foundation was fraudulent.
The directors of James Hardie Industries Limited took a lot of advice, a lot of independent advice. PricewaterhouseCoopers, Access, the actuaries, Trowbridge, have worked with the company for many years, and then formed the view that this was the right amount of money.
But McDonald knew that Pricewaterhouse and Access had not said the fund had the right amount of money.
In the words of Peter Shaffron himself, Hardie's legal counsel, these companies were asked not to investigate or understand the assumptions. They simply wanted those organisations to give it their blessing.
So those firms were not asked to do genuine scrutiny of the fact of the overall project?
No. In fact, all of their reports were, in that sense, completely meaningless. All of the critical matters which went to this entire fiasco were in the assumptions.
Thanks, Peter.
Phil Morley, James Hardie's chief financial officer, shared the stage with McDonald that day. He was cross-examined under oath about the use of the financial experts. Morley admitted they were simply there as part of the media strategy.
Can you think of any other reason why PricewaterhouseCoopers and Access Economics would be invited to indulge in this arid exercise rather than an exercise of substance?
This was all about how we're going to go to the media, and both Mr McDonald and Baxter wanted to be able to say that at least the work we'd done had been checked out by PwC and Access.
A further revelation came from Hardie's in-house asbestos expert, Wayne Attrell. He admitted they knew the whole Trowbridge report was based on false assumptions.
The one piece of evidence in the commission that stands out in my mind is that of Mr Attrell, who was their counsel when all of these things were put to him.
You would have appreciated in February 2001 that Trowbridge was using $135,000 as the average settlement figure in mesothelioma and general liability claims?
Yes, sir. That would be right.
Thus, you would have been aware that the likelihood of their projections being grossly inaccurate was a reality.
Yes.
Given the alleged extent of Hardie's prior knowledge of the gross inaccuracies in the Trowbridge report and their complicity in supplying the dodgy figures, the Commissioner is now considering whether Peter McDonald committed fraud with his claims in 2001 that the foundation was fully funded. Peter McDonald, for his part, is blaming Trowbridge. 3 weeks ago, Peter McDonald announced James Hardie's first quarter results for the year. He went on a phone hookup to analysts and financial journalists.
I will now open up the teleconference for questions.
Sunday got in the queue to put to him some questions he'd refused to answer publicly. Peter McDonald, you seem to be putting the blame squarely at the hands of the actuaries, but you knew perfectly well in 2001 that the Trowbridge report was not a reliable means of establishing an amount of money for the fund.
That's a statement, Sarah, with which I don't agree, and the materials before the inquiry refute that, I believe, completely.
So are you saying you had perfect confidence in the Trowbridge report to establish a figure that would cover your asbestos costs, liabilities into the future?
No, Sarah, I couldn't say that. It's not possible to have perfect confidence in an actuarial estimate. It is, by definition, an estimate.
So what was driving the James Hardie executives to cut corners? What they desperately wanted was to tap into American wealth, investment to drive the company's expanding business in the US.
Hardie's had sought to float the company in the United States in the several years before these events. They had conducted what they referred to as roadshows. Those roadshows had been spectacularly unsuccessful, principally because, they believed, of the association with asbestos liabilities.
The victims' lawyers believe the company was afraid of being swamped by a third wave. People who'd never worked for Hardie's, but who used their asbestos products.
It had been something that was a long time coming and that James Hardie knew was coming, and particularly in home renovations where a fibro house was built in the 40s or 50s or 60s, and then in the 70s or 80s there were renovation or extension work carried out.